Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Grandma and Grandpa Days. I mention especially Grandma a lot, but to me, there would never be a better grandma than I had. And I did spend a lot of time with her. So we'll go back a little bit. Granddad was born in 1868, I believe, no, 1862, and in Indiana. Now, whether his folks came from Germany or not, I don't know. But anyhow, Granddad at 17 uh, left for the state of Missouri. Now, whether he had relatives there or not, I don't know. But he went to Missouri at 17, and he met up with a friend, Jack Detmer, and the two of them came to western Kansas. Now, how they got out there, I don't know. They might have walked, or I never did hear, but they come out and they homesteaded out there, and they built a sod house, and they lived there together. And it was right on, half of it was on Granddad's land that he was homesteading, and the other half of the house was on what Jack's was uh, homesteading. Well, when it was surveyed years later, they found out that one of them was living on the other one's house. But I guess it worked out all right. And Grandma, she was born in Iowa in 1868, and she came out with her folks on the train, and I think they landed someplace in Nebraska, and then they came down to Goodland, Canarate, and so on, I guess, by covered wagon. And Grandma had the three brothers that and they all homesteaded too. And the one of them was the one that Bill, it was the one that Dad bought the land from where our home house is. And the other two, they homesteaded, and one of them, I think, finally got the place for the grandparents, where their parents lived, and that later was not left to any of the Daises. And the other one was in the family for over 100 years. But anyway, Grandma come out to take care of these brothers. And where they lived at that time, I don't know. But she tells about the house that they lived in. It had a dirt floor, and it must have been a soddy. And Grandma coming from Iowa, I think she would tell about the parties she went to and to the close friends she had. And I think she was really, really homesick for back there. Now, Granddad, he never ever talked about his family that I can remember, but he did have one brother, Philip, that followed him out to western Kansas, but he didn't like Kansas, so he went back to Missouri. And years later, three of his sisters came out, and they were from the east somewhere too, but he just didn't talk about them. Now, Grandma's side, they were different. They uh, they were a close family, and her dad's name was Jeremiah, and the mother, I think, was Margaret, I believe, or all right, Margaret, and they lived, like I say, about 3 miles south of where the folks' own place is. And the stories I heard about, mostly about them, is that her mother got to be an invalid after Jeremiah passed away, and Grandma took care of her. She also took care of the uncle that gave Bob and I the nickels, and then the other one was in a nursing home in town. But anyhow, when they lived there, when uh, I don't know what they did. I've never heard of them homesteading or anything. The most I ever heard about Grandma's dad, Jeremiah, was that he'd start walking to Goodland on Friday and stay and dance all night Saturday night and walk home Sunday. Now, why he didn't ride a horse or take a buggy or what, I don't know. But they said that he walked. And evidently she didn't go with him. He just liked to dance, and he'd go down there. And Dad talks about the grandma when she was living there, and how invalid she was, I don't know. But she smoked a corncob pipe. And when Dad was 10 or 12, he got to light that corncob pipe for her. And so that kind of takes care of them relation. And then when Grandpa and Grandma got married, I think in the 70s, wasn't 1670s? Anyway, I think they were both about in their 30s. And I think they got married in the sod house or sod church by Canareta. And another story says they got married in the First Catholic Church in Goodland. So anyway, they got married somewhere, and they had 6 kids, but only 4 of them survived. And when Grandma was raised, when they got married, they just had a little part of the house Grandpa built. And as the family grew, and they needed more room, I think they made 3 additions to it. And Grandma, even though they had the kids, she also boarded the schoolhouse or school teacher every year. The schoolhouse was a sod house right across the street, across the road from there. And all the kids and Paul, the first grandson, he went to first grade there, but the rest of the kids went to this sod schoolhouse. Grandpa, they said when he came out there, he did dealt in horses and cattle, and I guess later he farmed. And Grandma, I guess was just a housewife, but I think before she came out, she was a seamstress because she made all her clothes. And I can't ever remember her having very many bought dresses. She made her own dress, and you couldn't tell the difference than than bought ones. And she could really, really crochet when she did this. Now, like I say, Grandpa took care of the livestock, and I can never ever remember Grandma being down around the barn. And Grandpa had a garden. And I can never ever remember Grandma being in the garden. Now, she could have, but and I know that he raised a pie plant, or rhubarb, and he had onions and beets, and I'm sure other stuff. But he always planted a lot of potatoes and strawberry, not watermelon. And I can remember him kind of plowing with a horse, pulling this machine. Of course, I don't remember what it was, but I think it was probably when he was planting in potatoes. Grandpa took care of the chickens, but Grandma did gather the eggs, and she raised chickens. And they had what they called a chicken coop. Well, on the south side of the chicken house, there was a big pen, and it was all fenced. And I think they were the only ones in the country that didn't let the chickens run around their yard. But they did not run around Grandpa's or Grandma's yard. They always were in that pen. And then Grandma had this chicken coop. And I don't know whether you know what a setter is or not, but it's when a hen quits laying eggs and just wants to sit, and they're grouchier in the dickens. But anyhow, when one would do it like this, and evidently it was kind of in the spring or late spring, why Grandpa would fill, I think three. I don't think there's ever three bushel baskets full of hay, and make a nest in there. And Grandma would put, I think she put 8 or 9 eggs in there, and then she'd take one of these setting hens and set on these eggs, and then she'd put the lid back on the bushel basket so they couldn't get out. And once in the daytime, she'd go out, take the lid off so they could get out and drink and eat. And then she'd wait a couple hours or so, and she'd go back and put them back in again. And I think it takes 21 days, I'm not sure, 21 days for these eggs to hatch. And of course, they all didn't hatch, but she'd hatch probably 30 chickens. So she would let the old hen and the chickens run around the yard. But when the chickens got so they could more or less run on their own and stay away from the mother hen and quit going back in that chicken coop at night, why, Grandpa had a long wire hook on it, and he'd catch all of them with them hooks and put them out in that pen. And if Grandma wanted a chicken to make chicken and dumplings, which was one of his favorites, why, he'd go down and hook a hen, or if she wanted to fry her, he'd hook one of these young chickens, pick the chicken's feathers off, and Grandma would go on from there. She did gather eggs, like I say, part of the time. And when I'd help her, and one of those hens, the setters would be on there, and she didn't want it to set, I would never reach underneath them like she did. I'd take a stick and poke them out of that nest. But Grandma, they'd let her reach underneath them. And they had roosts in the chicken house. And at night, those chickens would fly up on those roosts. And so they'd mostly come in the chicken house at night. In the summertime, it was hot. Lots of times they would stay out in the nest all day. And Grandma, I'm sure when Canerada was flourishing, they might have went to town in a buggy together or something. But later, when Grandpa had the Model T, why, Grandma, I don't think, except bringing over the washing, she never went to Canerada with him. But she'd go to town with the folks and do her grocery, and Grandpa would shop down there. And Grandma did a lot of canning. She had always had pears and peaches and apples. And she made pickles. And so he had cucumbers too out there, I guess. And beet pickles and strawberry and grape jelly. Well, they had a cellar not very far from the front of the house, and it was pretty deep. I think it was probably at least 8 steps down there, and it was always dark, so you'd have to take a light with you, and it was always cool down there. And so I think Grandpa usually carried most of the canned food down, but then Grandma would go down and arrange it the way she wanted it done. So they kept a lot of canned food down there. Grandma did, well, she churned, and she had a crock churn, and one of those that stand up that you see, and instead of one that would churn around, this was one that just stopped. And us kids loved to make that butter. We'd stomp that thing. She'd say, not too hard, not too hard. And anyway, after it turned into butter, why, she'd take it and wash it and make it into, and take the buttermilk. Both of them liked buttermilk. Ooh. And she had a butter press, she called it. And it was a square about, I don't know, so like that. And then she'd cut it in cubes. And then she'd put these cubes in a jars. It was bigger than a quart jar, and it was, I don't think it was a gallon, but anyway, she'd put it in a jar and she'd put milk in a jar. And then she would walk down to the well house and throw it in the water barrel and keep it cool in there. Well, Grandpa's garden was right with the well house too, so he irrigated all the time. And so he had pretty good gardens. And if one of us kids were over there and she needed to butter the milk, well, she'd send us down there. Um, and there was a washing machine in this well house. Now, I never did see it run, but it was a wooden one. And how it run, or how maybe she washed with a wash tub in it or what, I don't know. But from the time I can remember, she went over and did it at the folks. I never saw Grandma go any flowers. In fact, I don't think I ever saw any flowers in the house. She never ever weeded. And she never belonged to any clubs, but she was, like I say, on the school board for a long time. Now, they said that Grandpa was in politics pretty heavy, and of course that was before my time, and he was a constable of Grant Township and a trustee, I guess, of the whole area. I don't know where all, and of course into that equity. And he did spend a lot of time in Canerada. And the only time I can remember him going to Goodland was when he went to church. And he tried the Model A, or Model T, I mean, down there then. Really, as far as doing anything with us kids, it was mostly a grandma. I can remember going over there needing a meal or something. And Grandma would drink hot water with milk and sugar in it. Grandpa had coffee, and I had coffee. I guess it was Docky at that time, but I drank coffee. And he told me, he said, now when you get, and he put cream and sugar in it. It was probably mostly cream and sugar. But anyway, he said, now when you get bigger, he said, we'll throw away the sugar. Well, we did. Another thing they like to do, one time, Grandma always went to all our programs or literaries, and I can't ever remember Grandpa going to any of them. But one time we went going to literary, and Joanne was little, about 2 at the time, and so he was going to babysit her, and they brought him over, and Joanne didn't, if I can remember right, Joanne didn't object to us leaving, but then later in the evening, she wanted to talk to Dad, and she wanted Granddad to call him on the phone. Well, Granddad said, okay, and evidently he must have held Joanne up, and they called Central, or the telephone office in Canerada, and she said, I want you to call my dad. Well, of course, Jake Riley didn't know where he was. He said, who is this? And she said, evidently told him, Joanne Daise. Well, I don't know, where is your dad? She says, well, you're supposed to call him. Well, anyway, when we come home from literary, why, evidently she let Granddad rock her to sleep, because they were both asleep in the rocking chair. And evidently, Granddad didn't tell Dad when he took him home. He didn't evidently tell Dad about the telephone call. But the next time Dad was in Catarina and saw Jake, why, he was kind of laughing about the telephone call. And of course, Dad didn't know anything about it. And he was informed. And Riley, he thought it was kind of funny. And so Dad was telling, he asked Granddad, he said, what about that telephone call you and Joanne made? And Granddad said, well, she wanted to talk to you. And he said, that's what a telephone's for. So he said, I just called Jake Riley. And I told him we didn't know where you were, but that was all right. And Another thing, I didn't tell you, when Granddad came out, and I don't know how long he'd been there, evidently it was when he was in this politics, he changed from a Republican to a Democrat. And when he left home, why, they spelled his name D-A-S-E. And when he came out there, he put an I in it, D-A-I-S-E. And all of Granddad's descendants, we pronounced it Daise. But whenever he talked about it, he'd call it Daise. And why I don't know. But his relation back in the East, they put an I in their name too lately. But when he came over, it was, and they asked him his name, it was always J.W. Daise. Now, Grandma, she was a beautiful handwriter. Dad and Marguerite, Betty too. But those three really were. The rest of us, we just wrote. I never remember seeing Grandma read the newspaper, but she'd always read the catalogs from one end to the other, and we'd always look at the pictures of patterns and dresses, and I think that's where she got her idea. Now, Grandpa, he read the paper, and Capper's Weekly was the main paper that he took. I said earlier that Granddad's dealt in cattle and horses. Well, later, I guess he farmed. Now, I can't ever remember him farming. I know that Dad farmed his land for him, but Granddad had cattle a long time. And I can remember, like I say, Grandpa plowing out there his potatoes and so on. And there was one thing that I wanted to tell you about. In their house, they had really a living room, Grandma called it. I don't know. They just had a couch and so on in there, and really didn't use that room too much. And anyhow, I guess they saw a rat or a mouse or something, and Granddad got his gun and was going to shoot it. Well, instead of him shooting out the door, he shot the wall. And there was a hole. Well, you can imagine Grandma was not happy. And when Dad came over, not only had Granddad lost the car to drive, he also lost his gun that day, too. That Granddad's that gun was gone. I don't ever remember being over at the house or what happened to it. I don't know, but Granddad didn't have it anymore. The folks had a barn dance once in the hayloft of their barn, and Granddad never went down to the dance, but George and Dad helped Grandma down, and she went up and she stayed a while and listened to the music, and she went back before too late, but she said that was one of the best things that she ever enjoyed. And while we're talking about barns, when Grandpa and Grandma were first there, they had I don't know, the bottom part of it was rock, and what it was made out of, I don't know. But I think it was one late afternoon, Dad tells about it, that there was a really, really bad lightning and thunderstorm, and the lightning struck the barn and burned it down. They said they looked out the window, the fire was all on fire, and I think 2 horses burned. But anyhow, and I think, well, I know when I was still there, that foundation was still out there, and us kids used to have a lot of fun just running around on it. We'd play tag, or we'd play different games on this cement things, but Kansas was kind of known for its bad storms. When Grandpa got older, why, and he didn't have the horse anymore, or have the Model T anymore, why, when Herbert, Mother's brother, and Grandma moved to town, why, they had a Shetland pony, and they gave it to us. Well, none of us ever rode it. I think I told you about the time that I was on it. And anyhow, Grandpa took the horse, Dempsey, and he would ride that horse, and they kind of made a funny looking pair because Grandpa was a pretty big man, and he rode this horse, and he'd ride it over. I don't know if he rode it to George's very much, but he rode it over home there, quite often. And one day, uh, cattle that time, if they got out in what they call cane or feed and ate some of this when it was green, why, it would make them bloat up, and most of the time they die. Well, one of the milk cows got out, and Mother and Marguerite and Betty and I, we got the cow back in the corral, and Mother went in and called Granddad and wanted to know if he could come over. So he came over, riding the horse, tied it up, and saw the cow lay there, and it was swelled really, really high. And he said, well, we'll try to save her. And he felt all along that calf. I can remember him just feeling all up and down that cow. And he said, well, we'll need a butcher knife. So he was sent, our mother went in the house, and she got, I think, probably the narrowest and longest butcher knife she had, and took it out. And he was still feeling around on this cow's side. And then he told Mother, he said, just feel along this side. And so the two of them were kind of feeling there. And he said, well, she's got to be stabbed. And he said, my hands aren't steady enough anymore. You'll have to do it. And so he measured out with his hands where she was supposed to stab it. And she took that knife and stabbed that calf right there. And you wouldn't believe when she did that, the cow didn't moan or anything, but you could hear it go shh. And I suppose it was just air or something, the bluff like that. And her and Granddad, I would call it massage, but rub or whatever, that calf, or cow, all afternoon, rubbing that, and every once in a while you'd hear this shh. And towards evening, I suppose maybe 2 hours or a little later, when that cow was kind of moaning, and pretty soon Grandpa said, well, she's going to make it. He said, so I'll go home. And he went over and crawled up on the wood railing fence, because he had to crawl up on something to get on the horse. And when Dad got home and heard the story, he said, I've seen Dad stab those cows before, but he said, I didn't think that you could do it. Well, Mother said I didn't have any choice. Anyhow, the milk cow lived. Another time, Mother could witch wells, and I don't know whether it was the well where the folks lived, but I think it was the one Grandpa lived in. It was a well, and Mother witched it. And when they witch a well, for you that don't know it, they just hold two, I think they're supposed to be limbs off of branches off of a tree or something. And if they'd shake just right, whether be water be found there. And Mother did this. I don't know whether she did it more than once or not, but I know that they said that she did it once. So her and Grandpa, they had several episodes, things they done together. Another thing, Grandma and Grandpa, you never hardly heard them sing or whistle or anything. But Grandpa used to sing, there's a long road to Tipperary, there's a long way to go, and he'd sing that especially when he's out by himself. And I thought, I wonder what Tipperary is, or if there really is a place. And you know what? Years later, I think maybe it was when I was teaching school, there is a Tipperary, and I think maybe it might be Germany, I'm not sure. And then Grandma, she would sing, She's Dead in the Coach Ahead, and that was a sad song. And I didn't care about that song very much, but she'd sing it every once in a while, or she'd hum when she was on her with her sewing machine. Why, she'd hum. I never ever remember Grandpa being mad or angry, but Grandma, when she'd get out of sorts, she'd hit her right leg with her right hand and she'd say, "Tut, oh tut." And if she said tut, things got pretty quiet around. Uh, when I went to school, the schoolhouse had been moved down towards the East Gravel, and like I said, we'd always walk and stop at Grandma's. Well, one winter or one year, when the neighbor lived. Well, it was where George and Francis lived in this house too, and we walked about a mile together. And they had their two grandsons stayed with them. Now, they never teased Marguerite and I much, but they did Bob and Jean. And if they happened to be teasing, they'd wait out on the road for us to come back out. Well, of course, the boys didn't want to go back out till they went down the road. Well, Grandma would go out, and she had a long porch that ran along the north two rooms, and she'd go out on that porch, and she'd yell at those boys. She'd go on home. And they went because they knew if they didn't, she'd be calling their grandparents that they were staying with. And another thing, if we ever had a bad day at school or had problems with the teacher or problems, it was never her grandkids' fault. It was either the teacher's fault or some kid's fault. And so she was always that way for all 17 of us. None of us, as far as I know, ever done anything wrong. And she had a neighbor lady that lived north, and I think she was, I don't know whether she was German or no, she must have been Irish or something, because they took Grandma up. This lady got sick one day, and she was trying to tell them something. So they couldn't come down to see if Grandma could understand her, and she could partially. So evidently she was talking Irish. Now the other one that she was a neighbor with was German, and Grandma probably learned some German from Grandpa. I never did hear him talk either Irish or German, but I know that her folks talked Irish when they came out, and none of their 4 kids could talk Irish or German.
It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know.
I wish that I could, was the man's sad reply, but she's dead in the coach ahead.